Hello, everybody. You are here for a journey of immigration and a voice of advocacy. This is part one of a two-part series. Today's program is sponsored by the River Falls Library Foundation. My name is Tanya Misselt. I am the library director of the River Falls Public Library. Today, I'm going to introduce you to Juventino Meza. He moved to the United States from Mexico at the age of 15. In high school, Juventino, an honor student, was undocumented and believed that college was not an option for him. Juventino played a critical role in building a broad coalition to get President Obama to create Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, in 2012, and passed the Minnesota Dream Prosperity Act in 2013. He now holds a BA from Augsburg University and a Juris Doctorate with Native American law and sovereignty certificate from Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. Juventino is the only undocumented Minnesotan with a law degree to be appointed to a Minnesota state board. That would be the Minnesota Council on Latino Affairs. He is internationally recognized champion for human rights, a nonprofit executive, and a leader in civic engagement. Juventino lives in West St. Paul with his rescue puppy, Capuline. Please welcome Juventino Meza.
Thank you, Tanya. I have a presentation, sort of, that I'll walk through, and then I'll share a little bit of my story. And then I'll, along with sort of some data about Wisconsin and Latinos, I'll also use an example that I think illustrates kind of who the Latino community is. And then I'll talk about myself because I love talking about myself. So first of all, what do people know about Latinos in Wisconsin here? Anything. If you don't know anything, that's okay. Either data or when people moved here or so on. No? Okay. We're in Minnesota. The metro. Okay, that's okay. I live there. This is a lovely place. So I'll share some data. And one thing that I kind of want to illustrate with the data that I'll share is the different terms people in the Latino community use. I think I want to emphasize that there is no one way that people identify. There is no term that is comprehensive enough to identify people of Hispanic descent, Latino descent, and also that people kind of arrive in their own journey to a term that makes sense for them. And so I think when you talk to people about being Latino or the way that they identify, oftentimes I want to go back to kind of the history of the U.S., right? So before there is U.S., Canada, Mexico, and all these other countries in Latin America, there is no borders, right? There is tribes and tribal communities. Obviously, they had their own boundaries and ancestral lands. And so one thing that I think often gets overlooked in the Latino community is our deep connection in indigenous communities. And then obviously the Spanish conquest, European conquest, and all the wars that followed kind of influenced obviously where borders exist today, but it also influenced obviously the languages we speak. You know, if you look at I was born in Mexico, so I know a little more about Mexico, but I think it's the case in other countries. there is languages that are dominant, right? So like in Mexico, obviously it would be Spanish, but there is a lot of tribal communities who still speak their native language. And so if you now sort of think about all of that and think about the many ways that Latinos identify themselves, you can see that many still identify uh, as a member of a specific tribe. Obviously, that's the case in the U.S. As well. Many oftentimes identify with the country of origin or country of origin of their parents. I will say that even though I'm pretty comfortable using and identifying myself as Latino today, I didn't know what Latino was before I moved to the U.S. And so I think I used to fall in sort of that idea of identifying with the country of origin. And so I would always say I was Mexican and not, Latino didn't become part of my vocabulary until I was an adult in the US. There is also I think, a huge debate right now about the word Latin, Latino, Latinx, Latine, and I think it shows a little bit of this conflict about trying to be inclusive in the way that we identify as a community. And so, for example, Spanish is very male dominated, and I think that's why you get Latino. And then people, I think, who have become a little more aware of like gender, non-binary, and so on. So Latinx and Latine are a little more inclusive of folks who don't identify as male or female. And it's not a female male thing anymore. And then there is other terms that are more specific to either regions or people who grew up at certain times in the U.S. Again, kind of going back to history. There is the terms Chicano, Boricua. Boricua is a very Puerto Rican term that folks used. And then Chicano is more folks who kind of grew up around the border. And, if you think about, again, the history of the U.S. and the border moved a couple times. And so people in the Mexico-U.S. border are more likely to use Chicano, and they also are folks who didn't want to have that association with Spain, which is where Hispanic comes from, so someone who speaks Spanish. And so that's all to say that none of these terms, I think, reflect or are comprehensive in their own of how diverse the Latino community is. And my guess is that I think the Latino community itself is going to continue the debate about how we identify as a community, and we'll see where it goes. But just wanted to give you a little bit of background of sort of the community. I'm gonna continue to use Latino because I am used to it, but other people identify in different ways. I brought this map. There is a professor in, I think he's La Crosse in southern Wisconsin, who wrote about Latinos in Wisconsin. And one of the things that he points out with this map is how the wars and sort of who was which imperial power was around at what time. This map shows that Spain kind of took over around the Mississippi River, and so it went all the way up to Wisconsin, part of Minnesota, and obviously all the way to the south. And so borders have moved, but the sort of historically Latino community has this connection to Spain, and so you could see that Spain was in power all the way up here at some point. Which I think is interesting. This is a graphic that kind of explains the differences between Latino and Hispanic. Hispanic is more associated with the language Spanish, and so all of the countries, including Spain, that speak Spanish would fall under Hispanic. So anyone born in those countries would be Hispanic. You can obviously understand that Hispanic does not include people who don't speak Spanish, right? Like there is native folks who still speak their mother tongue, and so they wouldn't, couldn't fit in this Hispanic term. And then you have Latino, which is more like a geographical term that includes everyone in sort of this hemisphere in the U.S. and Mexico and Latin America, Central America. And so anyway, those are the sort of most used terms, and now you know why. These are some quick stats about the Latino community in Wisconsin. There is Latinos in every county. I kind of hovered over the map, and so there is Latinos in the entire state of Wisconsin, but you can see the majority are in the Milwaukee southern part of the state. The Latino is the second largest community growing in Wisconsin. It's a pretty young population. The average age is 25, I believe, and with a 40% under the age of 18. So again, just a pretty young community. This is a little bit about the percentage of people in Wisconsin, and Latinos are, if I remember correctly, like 5% or something like that. Sorry, I'm trying to look at my. Thank you for printing them, and I have forgotten about them. 7.3% in Wisconsin people are Latino, and then I found stats about River Falls, and Latinos are 2.3% of the city, and it's about 373 people, which it's great. Sorry, this is the data on River Falls. And then the most people who are Latino are mostly 80%. Was it 80%? I think who are Mexican, and these are the three top countries where people come from. These are the languages spoken in Wisconsin, and about 4.6% speak Spanish at home. Only 5% of people in Wisconsin are foreign-born. And I want to highlight this because I think we often equate Latino, Hispanic with immigrant. And in reality, most are U.S. citizens, most are born in the U.S. And then there is a few like me who were born outside of the U.S. And even if you I've had too many debates, but on this. But even if you look at the number of foreign-born people and their immigration status, still the majority are legal in the U.S., and it's a pretty small percentage of people who are undocumented within that foreign-born population, both in Wisconsin and other states. I wanted to show this. So the MCLA means Minnesota Council on Latino Affairs. I'm a board member, but I just wanted to show that it's changed the way that it's named. So at first it was the Spanish Affairs Council. In the 80s, and then in the 90s was named the Chicano Latino Affairs Council, and now we're the Latino Affairs Council. And so you can see kind of what I talked about earlier, that language has changed for us as a community. And I think the goal of these changes has been more about how do we become more inclusive in the way that we identify ourselves as a community. And again, my guess is that we'll change this at some point too, because Latino is gender-based. And so I think there is a push to try to become more inclusive. This is the board. Most of them are born in the U.S. Many of us were born outside of the U.S. We have people from a few different countries, including Brazil, Venezuela, Mexico, and then we have people who were born in St. Paul, or I know like Marta, red blouse on the far right corner. Marta was born in Texas by the border with Mexico, and so she used to be a farm worker with her family. So they used to travel as the seasons changed all the way up to Fargo, Moorhead area, and go back and forth. And her family eventually stayed in Moorhead, and that's where she lives now. But again, one of the many stories I think about the Latino community is our ties to farming, agriculture, and also universities. So we're all over the place in a good way. So I wanted to share that a little bit because I think it's important for context and understanding, and having, I think, a broader understanding of what it means to be Latino, and that it's changed over time. And so I'll talk a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Juventino Meza. I was born in Mexico and moved to the U.S. when I was 15 years old to reunite with my parents, who were already in Minnesota, in St. Paul. I ended up going to high school in St. Paul, Arlington High School. And at that time, I don't think I realized really what was going on until a little later, because even though when I moved to the US, I was supposed to start my junior year, the interpreter, Miss Eva Science, who I adore, and she told my mom that she should register me for the 9th grade instead of junior year. And I was not a happy camper. I mean, I think no teenager would be happy to spend 2 extra years in high school. And so that's definitely me. And then I ended up, I think that changed my life. I think it gave me the opportunity to spend more time in school and learn English. And I think it gave me the ability to prepare myself for what comes later, which was college and eventually law school. When I was in high school, I didn't know that I could go to college. I asked around if I could apply for college, and I was told that there wasn't really a way for an undocumented student to pay for college. You could get into a school, you just had to pay out of pocket on your own. And so that just was not gonna be pretty doable in my situation and my family. And so asking around, my counselor was like, let's go ask this program, College Possible, if they can help you. And they were also like, we don't know if we can help you, but let's see if we can figure it out together. And so they accepted me into the program. And then for the next 2 years, I stayed after school to learn about what college application was. I couldn't do FAFSA, but I learned about scholarship applications, scholarship programs, and got to visit a lot of schools, including River Falls here one time. And that really was pretty tough because there was no clear answer whether I was actually going to get into college. But eventually, I went to a college tour in St. John's and St. Ben's in Minnesota. And I met this admissions counselor, Carrie Carroll, and she was like, I don't know that I can help you, but let's talk more. And she had told me that Augsburg University, which is where I ended up going, had a policy at the time to accept one undocumented student every 4 years. I mean, this is a few years ago, in 2006. This is a time when if you remember, the state representative Sensenbrenner from Minnesota had proposed a bill which was called the Sensenbrenner bill. If you gave water to an undocumented person, you could go to jail. And so the conversation around immigration was pretty toxic at the time. And so there wasn't any laws, at least in Minnesota, that allowed an undocumented student like myself to go to college and pay in-state tuition. And then sort of like the broader conversation was also pretty toxic. If you think about those years as well, 2005, 2006 as well, President Bush had proposed immigration reform, and that got pretty ugly. And that's kind of where the Sensenbrenner amendment came in. And so the conversation was pretty toxic. And then, I didn't kind of understand the whole thing. But, if you go back to what Augsburg had done, right, like we're going to accept an undocumented student, it's a pretty big deal. Even though it didn't serve a lot of students, it's a pretty big deal. And also, if you think about the school had to cover all the expenses for that one student. I think it's like $27,000 when I started college. So that's, $100,000 for that one student. So it is a pretty pricey tag for making this bold move. But obviously I had come the year after, so there was already the undocumented student at Augsburg. And so Carrie went back to the university, and they had many conversations, and they decided that, if they wanted to be in a welcoming place like they claimed to be, they needed to change the policy and figure it out somehow. And they did. And that's been kind of the amazing part about Augsburg and other schools that changed their policies way before the state of Minnesota changed the law. And I sort of included a few pictures here. So I'm here with colleagues advocating for the Minnesota Dream Act in Minnesota. I'm pretty sure I'm in college in this year, so I'm a student at Augsburg University, and I stayed involved advocating for the Minnesota Dream Act until it passed in 2013. And the Minnesota Dream Act allows undocumented students who graduate from high school in the state of Minnesota to be eligible and considered a resident student and pay in-state tuition at the state colleges and universities, and qualify for state financial aid. So no Pell Grants, no federal loans, but a state grant, which is a huge thing, right? Like I said earlier, it would have been hard for my family to pay for school, and the Dream Act would have made a huge difference. But I was fortunate enough that Augsburg changed its policies and allowed me to apply and go through the process, along with my friend Ulises, who's on the bottom picture in a dark shirt. He and I went to high school together. And so I mentioned in College Possible, which was a college readiness program, and Ulises was not. But that didn't stop me from giving Ulises all of the information I was given. And then Ulises and I applied to Augsburg together, and we got accepted. And so we both graduated from college together. He was part of with me and the other folks of Navigate, which we started. These are 4 students. The tall guy, Davis in the white shirt, is an American citizen, but was a really good friend to Victor. And so all of us created this project, started as a summer project, the summer before I went to Augsburg. And the idea was that we wanted to share our stories with other undocumented students to learn about going to college. It didn't end up being just a summer program. We ended up kind of keeping it around for years. So I ran it for a few years while I was in college, and then other people came in and took over. Navigate Minnesota, it's now called Unidos Minnesota, and they do a bunch of pretty great work in Minnesota in the sort of immigrant rights work in other areas, and so it's expanded from just education. So I graduated from college in 2011, a few years ago, and then I went and worked in a few places in nonprofits. In 2012 was when President Obama created Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and I applied for it and benefited from it. I still have DACA. We have to apply every 2 years, and there is a filing of forms and fees to the government, and then there is FBI background checks every 2 years, and for every person who has DACA, that's sort of the process that you have to do to keep it. DACA allows folks to be protected from deportation for 2 years. So that's why it's important people keep it. And then you're able to get a work permit. And so this allows you to legally work in the US. I think DACA, at least for me personally, changed my life because it allowed me to be able to work in places that paid me more, have better benefits. And it also allowed me to apply for a driver's license in Minnesota. Even though we've passed a driver's license law since last year, I was able to get my driver's license through because of DACA in 2012. I think I applied right away. So I applied for a state ID and then eventually got my driver's license. And also, I think for me, it's important. It allowed me to make more money, and I was able to apply for a home loan, a mortgage, and so I bought a house. Bought my first car, and that I think there is this ripple effect when you're financially doing better around the people, people around you. And so I think for me that has always been pretty important. I have younger siblings, and I think that their life outcome improved as a result of me being able to have DACA and all of those other things. I eventually went to law school and graduated last year in 2023. Law school for me was really tough. For many reasons. I enjoy law school as a nerdy person. I think you can tell. But I think what was tough for me was that I couldn't qualify for federal loans, which I think is really ironic, right? Like I'm trying to further my education, but I can't get a loan. But then, which student loans, at least for law school, are I think a lot less than undergrad, or it felt like it was a lot less. But I was able to get a mortgage, like a $300,000 loan, and I couldn't get a $20,000 loan for law school, which was just made things way more difficult for me. I think I regretted going to law school because of how difficult it was. I had to pay out of pocket, and so the entire time that I was in law school, I had to work, and I think that never allowed me to really focus in school, and also it forced me to take longer than most students take, and so. Sorry, in the process, I regretted going to law school. I'm glad I finished. I'm glad I went, but it was pretty difficult. And I think I go back to like sort of maybe the purpose of why we started Navigate. And I think that for those of us who were part of Navigate, I think it was really hard for us to make it to college. There wasn't a lot of resources, there wasn't a lot of information, and I think through Navigate we made it easier for other students, and I think that's what I wish law school had been for me. Like it didn't need to be this hard, and so now I focus a lot in talking to people about how to do it right and prepare well, because I don't think law school should be that difficult for anybody. It's not worth it. And the other thing I have here is this program, Capital Pathways. I was able to do an internship when I was in college at the state capitol with Representative Carlos Mariani from St. Paul, who was my representative. And my experience at the Capitol was that it was pretty homogeneous. I think a lot of the young people who were doing internships there were coming from affluent families. And so they were able to not work and do a free internship, free work at the Capitol. And I think that limited who was able to have this experience. And so a few friends and I decided to create this program, Capital Pathways, where it was a paid internship. So students, this could be their job. And then it was going to be throughout session at the Capitol, and then they would be paired up with a lobbyist of some sort, whether that was an agency, a nonprofit doing lobbying work, or some other lobbying firm, private firm. And it still exists. We've had like 260 students who have gone through the program, all Native students or students who identify as a person of color. And it's been pretty successful in Minnesota. And a bunch of them are all over the place running programs in like banks and with sort of that background of policy wonky people. And then we have people who have run for office. And so it's been a pretty fun project for us. But I think for me, again, kind of tying it back to my experience about things don't need to be this hard, and also we should be everywhere. I think Capital Pathways kind of embodies that. I mentioned this already. I'm a lobbyist now in the state of Minnesota, and these are some of the work that I helped with in the last few years, or that I know too much about. Obviously, I mentioned the DREAM Act, so students have undocumented students have access to higher education in Minnesota. And I mentioned driver licenses. So in Minnesota, any person who qualifies under a pretty broad definition of resident can qualify for a driver's license, regardless of immigration status. In Minnesota, we also expanded access to healthcare insurance. It's not like Medicaid, where under a certain income you'll get access to it, but people are going to be able to buy into the system, which will be it'll be an improvement. Let's say that it's not all we wanted, but it's an improvement that people will have access to buy into the program for healthcare insurance. Minnesota also legalized marijuana. I always mention the legalization of marijuana because I used to work in immigration law, and I had too many clients. So I lived in California for a little bit, and I worked in an immigration law firm. And many of the clients had some sort of charge related to marijuana. And in federal law, charges against any controlled substance is a pretty big deal. And so many many lived in California, and many thought that because it's legal, people were engaging in the use of marijuana in some sort. Or they were farming. So like people were farm workers in marijuana fields, and it's against federal law. And so I always tell people that if you're not a U.S. citizen, do not even think about it. Try to become a citizen before you try to engage in either in the business of marijuana or as a user. And Minnesota passed this law last year, and one of the things that it does, it expunges certain charges related to marijuana for people. But when it comes to immigration law, it might not matter. And so that's why I'm always telling people, just don't do it. It's not worth it. And I remind people that because not just because it's legal, marijuana being legal means that you can partake in the business. And so it's been really interesting because people I think just want to feel normal. And so I think people sometimes just want to try it or whatever. And so, I always caution people to don't even do that. The immigration process, it's pretty daunting. Many of the forms that you have to fill out, and sometimes when you have to do interviews, you are asked, have you ever used a controlled substance? And so if you did marijuana, you have to be truthful, right? And so anyway, so it can complicate someone's case pretty dramatically. And so just a huge warning for people about it. Any questions on these few things? But this is some improvements we've made in Minnesota, at least. I'm gonna get done. I just wanted to share. I feel like I get really, really serious about everything. But have been able to be part of really exciting things. I got to meet Dolores Huerta. If you don't know who she is, you probably have heard of Cesar Chavez. He's a huge. He's like our MLK in the Latino community. He was a farm worker with Dolores, and they started the Farm Workers Union in Wisconsin. In Fresno, or the Fresno area, Bakersfield in California. And so, a lot of sort of labor laws, we're thankful to someone like Dolores Huerta. So I got to meet her, and it was really, really cool. And so I got her to sign this poster for my siblings. And I've had friends who have run for office before. And then there is this artist, Irving Vasquez, who designs not necessarily political work, but he designed the Prosperity Act, which is the DREAM Act, and that was signed by Governor Dayton. And then he also designed last year the poster for the driver's licenses for all in Minnesota. And so I got to keep a copy of each of them, and the driver's licenses for all. I got it signed by a bunch of legislators who were part of getting it done last year, which was really, really exciting. So I gave it to my family in honor of all of the work they've also done. I'm also a seed artist. If you've heard about crop art in this Minnesota State Fair, you should do it. Everyone's welcome to it. Obviously, Justice Sotomayor is my hero, and so this is my seed art and the process. There is a point in the process where you're like putting eyes on someone, and it looks kind of crazy, but it's pretty fun. It took me way too much work. I thought it was going to be relaxing, but it's not. So just a big warning on that. And then I ended up in the hospital because I caught myself making a frame for it, and it was wild. And then I got to drop it off, and here I am with my seed art and my bandaged knee. And anyway, I'm gonna stop there and really want to thank you all for your time. And I think we'll open it up for questions. Yeah.
And I'm gonna ask it again because I thought it was so informative. Okay. So shall I go up here? So my question is, if we could wave a magic wand and you could be a U.S. citizen tomorrow, how would your life change?
Are you a U.S. citizen?
I am not a U.S. citizen. Yeah. So I have DACA, which I talked about earlier, and that's a temporary protected status in a way, and I have to renew it every 2 years, and so that could go away. It actually, thank you for actually asking that. DACA is in the courts again. This is like the 10th time. And these conservative states sued the federal government to get rid of it. And so there is going to be a hearing, I believe in next week, in Texas. And so that same judge that ruled on it before had ruled that it was illegal, and then the Supreme Court got involved. So anyway, so it's stuck in the courts again. People wanting to get rid of it since it was created, and so it's been kind of a mental Olympics, thinking about it all the time that this comes up, because it's come up a few times where the program itself has been challenged in court. And so you never know if your protection continues or if it goes away, or sort of like what happens with your job, what happens with your ID. Now I know that at least in Minnesota, right? Like thankfully I'm in Minnesota, so I could go back and get a state ID through the new law. But it's pretty challenging. And I think to segue into your question about sort of what would change, I think it would, one, I think would be just like the certainty of not having to worry about this all the time. I have sisters in Mexico, and I have been able to see them. DACA allows, well, President Obama and President Biden have allowed people who have DACA to apply for advanced parole, which is a special permission to leave the U.S. and come back. And so I was able to see my sisters before, but I think that's one of the biggest things is that even though we have this protected status, we can't leave the U.S. And so, I talk to my sisters regularly. Family chat is alive and well. But, there is something about not being able to see them in person, and my grandma, like not being able to go to my grandpa's funeral a few years back. And I think that's sort of what kind of gets to the heart of it for me, is just sort of that stability of being able to stay connected physically to my sisters and their families. Obviously I met their kids and them, but right, like it's kind of a different relationship when you're so far away and you also don't get to see them almost never. And so I think for me that's kind of the biggest part that would change. I did say last time too, again, I'm a big nerd, that my dream is to serve in a jury duty. That's the other one. Oh, and travel. Yeah, like I would love to travel. My partner and I have been talking a lot about traveling, and so I hope that comes true.
Umbrella as opposed to the states.
The immigration status. We have an immigration lawyer now, but the immigration status, only the federal government can change someone's immigration status. It has nothing to do with what a state can do. The state can change the way it manages its benefits or its programs. So like I mentioned the driver's licenses. So that's a state thing, right? A state ID, state license. I mentioned the DREAM Act, that's state, in-state tuition, all of that state. So only the federal government can change immigration status. That's the difference. Anything to add?
Like states as opposed to the federal in terms of everything.
I think there is more states. Maybe this is what you're referring to, and I'm probably misinterpreting what you're saying.
Driver's license status.
How would that happen?
Illegal to drive in Minnesota. Is that true in Wisconsin?
I think so. The legislature has to change the driver's licenses for Wisconsin residents, and maybe what many states are doing now is being more proactive in protecting its residents than they were before. And there is also has been a lot of organizing. And so Minnesota passed a driver's license. It took 23 years to change it. And I think there is a bunch of people trying to organize in Wisconsin to change the law too. But in terms of traveling, I mean, people are driving, and so maybe they just don't have the state ID, at least people in Wisconsin who are residents of Wisconsin. But people can drive through states. That has not been, I think, a problem.
Wisconsin would have to accept Minnesota's driver's license. So there's a federal part of the U.S. Constitution is called the Whole Faith and Credit Clause. So if Minnesota gives somebody a driver's license, Wisconsin has to accept that fact.
Okay.
So if you have a lawful license in Minnesota, you can drive through Wisconsin. Wisconsin has to accept.
But if you're in Wisconsin, they may not give you that license.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yes, I'll speak. Oh. Okay.
So I just like to say that if you're a nerd, I'm a nerd, and we can be nerds together, amigo. Yeah. So just in closing, thank you for everybody who's listening, and thank you for everyone who's here today. Thank you for coming out here and telling us and exposing us to something new and developing our empathy towards our fellow human being. I would like to tell you a couple things that are coming up. We have Braver Angels coming. Fortunately, due to our collaborative relationship with AAUW, American Association of University Women, we have been able to co-host Braver Angels coming up on Tuesday, October 8th. For those of you who don't know what Braver Angels is, it's not a religious group. Braver Angels is a national grassroots organization working to depolarize America. We often lack basic understanding of why people on other political sides hold their beliefs. We don't see them as they see themselves, their core values and central concerns. And I cannot think of a better time for us to have Braver Angels come and talk to us. And then the second part of this series is called A Journey of Immigration, A Voice of Advocacy, Part 2 by an attorney by the name of Mark Prokesh. He just walked in the room. I just tried to catch to make sure I pronounced it right. So that is Thursday, October 17th at 6:30, and I hope you'll join us for that too. Thank you, everybody.